Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. Story 1. The corridor that counted backwards. I arrived at the research dormitory long after sunset, dragging my small suitcase across a corridor that felt far too long for the size of the building. The air was still, almost pressed flat against the walls, and every step I took made a soft tap, then an echo that seemed delayed, as if the hallway needed a moment to remember it had to respond. I paused halfway through, letting the silence settle. The ambience here was different, thick, observant, patient, the sort of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the tiny crackle of settling dust. Then I heard it. A number. Whispered. 10. It came from somewhere ahead, carried by no breath, no tone, just a dull vibration passing through the metal of the closed doors. I stood still, listening. The corridor waited with me. 9. Lower this time. Slower, as though something behind the walls was counting down to an event I hadn't been warned about. I stepped forward because I didn't know what else to do, and the next number didn't come from ahead. It came from directly behind me. 8. And I hadn't heard anyone approach. I didn't turn around immediately. Something in the corridor, in its stillness, its odd delay, to its hollow breathlessness, told me that turning too fast would make whatever waited behind me react. So I stood there, spine stiff, listening to the silence that followed the whispered 8, letting it stretch until it almost hummed against the inside of my skull. When I finally dared to glance back over my shoulder, there was nothing, just the long corridor, lit by a single dim ceiling bulb that flickered with no pattern at all. My own shadow stretched behind me like a dark spill, unmoving, but the feeling had changed. The ambience, earlier just heavy, now felt tilted, as if the entire building had subtly leaned towards me, putting its weight on the air around my shoulders. I inhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. Perhaps it was old piping, or some strange acoustics. I had heard of buildings that swallowed sound, and others that twisted it. I tried to step again. That was when the corridor made a sound I had not produced. A solitary footstep, soft, careful, directly mirroring mine, half a second too late. I froze mid-stride, and the echo of my own halted movement rippled faintly down the hall. The step that followed wasn't mine. It didn't match the pressure of my foot, nor the rhythm of my breath. It was the step of someone who wanted me to believe I was walking alone. I whispered, "Hello?" The word dissolved before reaching the walls. Then, faintly, from within the metal of the nearest door, 7. This time the number dragged slowly, like a voice learning how to form human sounds. I approached the door, even though everything inside me pleaded not to. Dust lined the frame. The seal at the bottom was untouched. This dormitory wing hadn't been used in years, or so I'd been told. I leaned close, pressing my ear against the cold surface. Nothing. No breath. No whisper. Even the numbers seemed to have evaporated. But when I stepped back, the corridor exhaled, a light shift of air. Barely there, brushing past my neck like a fingertip. Something else was wrong too. I blinked at the ceiling. The bulb overhead wasn't flickering anymore. It was pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. And after a few seconds, I realized it matched something. A distant heartbeat. Not mine. When the next pulse dimmed the light, the quiet voice returned from somewhere deep inside the walls. 6. And I hadn't moved at all. The corridor no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied, not by footsteps or figures, but by sound itself, shifting and pressing against the walls like something alive. I could sense it growing denser, as though each whispered number thickened the air and narrowed my path. I tried to steady my breath, but even that had begun to sound unfamiliar. My inhalation seemed slow, weighted, yet the exhale echoed back quicker than I released it, as though the hall were breathing for me, hurrying me along. I moved forward again, a cautious, measured step. The corridor responded instantly. A tap behind me. Louder, sharper, almost irritated that I dared to move without permission. The echo rushed ahead of me, curving around the walls and returning distorted. A metallic groan running beneath it. I turned in a half circle, whispering into the dimness. Is anyone here? The silence answered first. A suffocating, pressing quiet. Then, from the floorboards beneath my shoes, a deep vibration lifted through my legs. Not quite a voice, but a pulse, like something was pacing under the floor. Then came the next number, 5. No longer a whisper, a low chant, vibrating through the pipes overhead. I stared at them as they trembled gently, dust trickling down in thin lines. Whatever had once been counting from within the walls had spread through the entire structure. The lights dimmed, then brightened, not as a malfunction, but in a deliberate cadence. I felt a strange pressure against my ribs, as though the building wanted to sync my breathing with its rhythm. I forced myself to speak. Stop, please. The corridor responded with a new sound, a knock from the far end, slow, hollow, repeating every few seconds. I swallowed hard. It wasn't random. The knocks were spaced perfectly, creating a pattern. And with each knock, the hallway seemed to contract just slightly, the ceiling feeling lower, the air denser. 4. This time the number didn't come from behind a door. It drifted down from the ceiling above me, as if someone were lying perfectly flat on the other side of the plaster, whispering through it. I stepped back instinctively, bumping against the wall. The surface, cold moments ago, was now warm, very slightly, like the temperature of a palm pressed there for a long time. I pressed my ear against it before I could stop myself. There was movement, a faint sliding, as though something inside the wall shifted when I touched it, repositioning itself purposefully. Then, a sound rolled down the corridor. Not human, not mechanical, a dragging noise, as though someone were pulling something heavy along the far end of the hall. But the rhythm wasn't right. It wasn't the scrape of an object. It was too fluid, too wet. I forced myself to walk, even as my legs trembled beneath the weight of the surrounding sound. Every step I took, the dragging paused, listening. Every time I stopped, it resumed, a little closer than before. I whispered, "Why are you following me?" The hall answered with a chorus of creaks, as if beams and pipes bent inward to hear me better. 3. The number rumbled through the floor, rising like a heartbeat through concrete. This time, it felt close, too close, as if the countdown had nothing to do with the hallway at all. But with me, the dragging sound stuttered, then stopped entirely. Silence swept in again, thick, smothering, unnatural. Then came something I dreaded, a second voice. It overlapped the first, softer but clearer, coming from a door I had just walked past. 3. 2 identical numbers, spoken from 2 different places at once. The countdown was splitting. Something was multiplying in the walls, and I realized, with a cold weight sinking into my spine, the number wasn't just getting louder, it was getting nearer. I realized I could no longer tell where the corridor ended. The dim bulbs stretched ahead in a colorless sequence, but the farthest one flickered in a way that made distance unreliable, sometimes near, sometimes impossibly far. The dragging sound had stopped entirely, but its absence didn't feel like safety. It felt like a held breath. 2 voices whispering, 3 simultaneously, had changed the air. The corridor wasn't echoing anymore. It was responding. I forced myself to approach the door where the softer voice had originated. The metal surface looked no different from the others, sealed, dusty, untouched for years, but standing this close made my skin prickle. The air in front of it felt faintly charged, like standing next to an old radio tuned just off station. I raised my hand slowly. My fingertips trembled before they even touched the surface. The moment my skin grazed it, the door exhaled. A warm rush of air, the temperature of breath. Someone, or something, was standing exactly on the other side of that metal sheet. I jerked back, heart pounding in my throat. The corridor reacted instantly. Every light bulb hummed in unison, pulsing faintly as though syncing with my heartbeat. Then came the dragging sound again, but this time it wasn't at the far end. It was behind the door. A long pull, then another, slow, deliberate, like something repositioning itself directly against the inner surface. I whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, nothing answered. The silence stretched, tense and almost intelligent. Then, very gently, the old metal shifted beneath a subtle pressure, not a push, not a knock, but the kind of movement that comes from someone leaning their entire weight against it. 2. The number wasn't whispered this time. It vibrated straight through the steel and into my bones. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. The corridor felt narrower now, smaller, as if shrinking around the countdown. I stood there, breathing carefully, listening for movement. Instead of a sound, I noticed something else. The door now had a faint outline of warmth spreading across it, in the shape of a hand. A handprint pressed from the inside. 5 fingers, long, too long. They pressed harder, metal groaning, bending 0.5 millimeter outward. Dust shook loose from the frame. The dragging resumed inside, but the rhythm had changed quicker, more urgent, circling, like whatever was in there was searching for another way out. I took another step back. The doorway behind me creaked, and I spun around in panic, but it wasn't opening. The wood merely shuddered as though something brushed past it from the other side. I was surrounded on both sides. The pulses from the light bulbs intensified, no longer matching my heartbeat, but creating their own rhythm, a slow, patient percussion. The warmth on the metal door condensed into a more defined pressure. The steel began to bend outward, forming a shallow bulge. I reached instinctively for the nearest exit sign, but the green glow flickered out as if swallowed. A second later, a noise broke through the tension, Sharp, high, unnatural. A click. It came from the door. The sound of a lock releasing. My chest tightened. These rooms weren't meant to open. They were sealed, welded in some places, officially decommissioned. Yet the lock inside had just released. Deliberately, I whispered, barely audible. Don't open. The corridor didn't obey. Bit by bit, with excruciating slowness, the handle began to turn. Not in one smooth motion. It stuttered, paused, twisted back a fraction, then continued as though an unsteady hand was trying to mimic human movement. My breath hitched. The dragging inside stopped instantly, as if waiting. The handle clicked into its lowered position. The door shifted outward half a centimeter. Warm, stale air seeped through the gap, carrying with it a quiet murmur of something moving inside. I leaned forward, against all instinct, trying to see through the crack. Something moved in the darkness beyond. Not a shape, a rhythm, a faint, soft tapping, like fingertips against concrete. Tap, pause, tap, tap, long pause, tap. A pattern, a message. I felt the meaning before I understood the sound. The tapping wasn't trying to frighten me. It was knocking back, communicating, trying to finish the countdown with me. Then, just as the silence tightened to the point of pressure, the voice came through the crack, inches from my ear. One, and the door began to open wider. The door edged open no more than a palm's width, then stopped. Completely, as if whatever had been pushing it suddenly withdrew. The stale warmth pressing through the crack faded, replaced by the natural cold of the empty corridor. I waited, body rigid, expecting the handle to twitch again, or the tapping to continue, or the whisper to slide out from the gap. Nothing happened. The silence returned, not the smothering, listening quiet from before, but a neutral, almost natural stillness. It felt wrong simply because it felt normal. I leaned forward, just slightly, peering into the thin darkness between the frame and the door. Nothing moved. No fingers. No shifting weight. No presence pushing forward. The room behind the crack was utterly dark, as though it swallowed the weak corridor light before it reached the threshold. I stepped back, breath unsteady. The corridor lights had stopped pulsing. They held a steady, pale glow now. Even the gentle hum of the electrical wires sounded comforting compared to the distorted echoes from earlier. For the first time since entering the dormitory, I felt the possibility of safety. Thin, fragile, but present. Maybe whatever had been in the wall had retreated. Maybe the countdown had finished, and the danger had passed. Maybe I had misheard the dragging, misread the vibrations. Let my imagination turn an abandoned wing into something alive. I whispered to reassure myself. It's over, isn't it? The corridor didn't answer. I carefully placed my hand on the doorframe. It no longer radiated warmth. My fingertips brushed the edge of the cracked open door. The metal felt cool, still. Even the faint bulge where the handprint had distorted the surface looked less pronounced, as though the steel had relaxed the moment the presence behind it disappeared. I exhaled. A long, shaking breath. A whisper of relief trickled through my body, loosening the tension in my shoulders. I reached out, intending to gently push the door closed again, not to seal it, just to remove that unsettling sliver of blackness. But the door didn't move. It wasn't stuck. It was being held from the inside with a delicate pressure, like someone pressing one fingertip lightly against the metal. Not enough to open, not enough to threaten, just enough to prevent it closing. My pulse flickered, but I forced myself not to yank my hand away. I pushed a little harder. The door resisted with the same soft, persistent pressure, as if the presence behind it wished only to keep the crack open, not wider, not narrower. A strange calmness settled over me. Not comfort, more like resignation. I lowered my hand and stepped back. The door remained still. I decided to walk away. Slowly, without sudden movements. I took one step, then another. The corridor didn't react. No footsteps mimicking mine. No dragging inside the walls. No whispered numbers. Finally, I reached the turn leading to the lifts. The corner light hummed gently. The air felt breathable again. I let out a shaky exhale, feeling a small and foolish smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Maybe it truly was over. I pressed the lift button. The soft metallic ping when it acknowledged the call gave me an almost childish comfort. I watched the floor numbers descend steadily, cleanly, without distortion or delay. When the doors opened, I stepped in, leaning my back against the cool wall. The lights inside the lift were steady. The mirror showed nothing unusual. My reflection looked pale, shaken, but intact. The doors slid shut. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The lift began to move. And then, just before the floor indicator shifted to the next number, I heard it. A soft tap from inside the lift wall behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. The same pattern as before. My eyes snapped open. I turned slowly, pressing my ear to the cool metal. No breath from the corridor. No lights flickering. Just the lift moving smoothly down. But the tapping continued. Paced. Gentle. Rhythmic. Not frantic. Not hostile. Communicative. I whispered, "What do you want from me now?" And then the lift answered, not with a voice, not with a vibration, with a number whispered so quietly that I felt it more than heard it, spoken from the metal beside my cheek. 0. Relief evaporated instantly, because countdowns don't end at 0. They begin. The whispered 0 lingered inside the lift like a thin strand of breath, clinging to the walls long after the voice had fallen silent. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My fingertips hovered just above the metal panel where the sound had emerged, terrified that touching it would invite another whisper, another countdown, another presence. The lift continued to descend with a steady hum. But something in that hum felt altered, slightly detuned, as though the machinery itself were holding its breath along with me. Then the lights flickered, only once, but long enough for the mirror opposite me to darken into a glass of pure black. When the lights stabilized again, my reflection returned, except it didn't reflect me from head to toe. It reflected only my outline, a silhouette without detail, as if the mirror were struggling to recall the shape of a human. I whispered, "No, no, not again." A faint vibration trembled behind my spine. Inside the lift wall, a heartbeat, but not mine, too slow, too deliberate, too measured. It pulsed in perfect rhythm, matching the memory of the countdown. 10, 9, 8, until the moment the whisper had reached one behind the door. And then 0, spoken directly into my ear. The sense of something standing too close behind me intensified. I could almost feel the weight of it leaning forward, pressing gently into the back of my shoulders. The lift walls creaked, as though expanding, making room. I slapped the emergency stop. The lift lurched violently and halted between floors. The sudden jolt threw me to my knees. The hum died instantly, leaving behind an oppressive silence. For a moment, I thought I had broken whatever connection the presence had to the lift. Then the tapping resumed. Tap, tap, tap. Long pause. Tap. But it wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside the mirror. I stared at the glass as the taps grew clearer, sharper, until I could see faint ripples in the reflection, like fingertips pressing outward from beneath a surface of dark water. No, no. Please stop. The mirror's darkness shifted subtly, as though someone's face leaned forward from the other side. A faint outline, not quite human, not quite formless, stretched the shadows. Then, a second tapping pattern began at the opposite side of the lift. 2 sources, 2 countdowns. Splitting again. I forced myself to stand. I couldn't stay in this enclosed space. Whatever had followed me from the corridor had no intention of simply finishing a countdown. It wanted me confined, sealed the way those abandoned rooms were sealed. I shoved my hands against the lift doors, but they didn't budge. The tapping behind the mirror quickened. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. The pattern wasn't random. It was guiding, like it wanted me to move to a specific spot. The metal walls thrummed in response, subtly vibrating under my palms. The hum of the lift returned, but this time it wasn't mechanical. It was a low drone, almost vocal. I backed away until I pressed against the opposite wall. The vibration grew stronger beneath me, rooting into my spine, climbing slowly toward my skull. Something in the building was trying to pull me in. No, I'm leaving. I am leaving now. My fingers scrambled along the emergency panel, searching for a release latch. Anything. Then I saw it. A small, square hatch at the top corner of the lift, half concealed behind a metal strip. I had never noticed it before. Another tap, a longer one, like a fingernail dragging slowly across the mirror's surface, pointing. The hatch. I climbed onto the handrail, hands trembling. The tapping grew more urgent, more insistent, following me upward. When I reached the hatch, I hooked my nails beneath the lip and pulled. It resisted at first. Then, with a metallic pop, it swung open, revealing a crawl space barely wide enough for my shoulders. Cold air spilled downward, carrying the scent of dust and stagnant metal. The tapping reached a frenzy. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Not threatening. Warning. Something behind the mirror wanted me out now. I hoisted myself into the crawl space, chest scraping against the cold metal. The moment my feet lifted from the lift floor, a low groan shuddered through the entire cabin. The lights flickered violently. The tapping stopped. Everything stopped. Then the mirror shattered. Not explosively, quietly, almost gently, as though the glass dissolved into dust. A wave of cold swept into the crawl space. Something moved below me, unseen, emerging from the darkness where the mirror had been. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, a weight of attention, a presence unfolding itself into the stalled lift. I didn't look down. I crawled forward as fast as my body allowed, breath raspy, elbows digging into the gritty metal, Behind me, something brushed the walls. A soft dragging, not heavy anymore. More like fingertips sweeping upward, searching for the hatch. The crawl space shuddered. The lift cables groaned. A pulse of air, warm, stale, rushed up from the hatch behind me. Then a whisper floated up the tunnel. Not a number this time. A single word. Begin. My blood turned to ice. I scrambled the remaining distance until my fingers struck another hatch, larger, heavier. I pushed. Nothing. I curled my knees under me and slammed upward with everything I had. The hatch burst open, and I tumbled onto a dusty storage landing. The moment my body hit the ground, the lift below groaned violently, then plunged. A hollow mechanical scream echoed through the shaft as the cabin fell, carrying whatever had just emerged inside it. I lay there, chest heaving, staring at the empty, dark hole beside me. Silence. Stillness. Nothing climbing up. For now, I stayed on the dusty landing for a long time, listening. The lift shaft below me had gone still. No groaning cables. No echoed impacts. No tapping from the shattered remains of the mirror. It was as though the fall had swallowed every sound the creature could make. But I didn't trust the silence. I pushed myself upright, brushing dirt from my palms. The landing opened into a narrow maintenance corridor, lit only by a dying strip light that buzzed softly, flickering in exhausted pulses. The ambience felt different up here, not suffocating, not pressing, but expectant. Like the building was holding back something it couldn't fully conceal. I walked slowly, each footstep swallowed by the dust. The air grew colder the farther I moved from the shaft, as though the temperature itself were retreating from me. Then, halfway down the passage, I saw it. A door. Not metal. Not sealed. A simple wooden door with a small frosted window, and behind that window, a light, warm, gold, absolutely out of place in a dead maintenance level. I approached cautiously. The warmth radiating from the other side was strangely soothing after everything that had happened. I lifted a trembling hand, resting my palm lightly against the wood. No vibration, no tapping. Just stillness. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope this door might lead to an office, a stairwell, anywhere grounded in normality. Then I heard it, a faint voice behind the frosted window, not whispering numbers, not tapping, just speaking, calm, patient, steady, saying my name. I froze. My breath caught between ribs. I hadn't told anyone I was here. No one knew I'd taken this abandoned wing. No one should know my name, much less say it so gently, as though they'd known me for years. My hand slipped from the door. The voice continued, soft but unmistakable, repeating my name again and again with the cadence of someone trying to draw me closer. Then the warm light behind the frosted window flickered, once, twice, and went completely dark. Silence pressed in, followed by a tap from the other side of the door. A single tap, the beginning of a pattern. Tap, 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 pause. Exactly the same rhythm that had guided me out of the lift, except this time it was tapping to invite me in. Story 2. The orchard with no wind. I arrived at the valley orchard just before dusk. The sky washed with the last pale traces of daylight. Rows of trees stretched out in quiet patterns, their branches perfectly still, as if the entire landscape were holding its breath. The caretaker had told me the place was peaceful at night, a good spot to rest while traveling. But the moment I stepped between the first row of trees, I sensed something unusual. There was no wind, not a breeze, not a stir, not even the faintest shift of air one would expect in an open valley. Yet the leaves moved, gently, softly, as though brushed by fingertips rather than air. I walked slowly along the narrow dirt path, listening. The quiet should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It felt arranged, manufactured, the way silence feels in a room where someone is pretending to sleep. Then, from somewhere deeper in the orchard, I heard it. Swizz, swizz, the unmistakable sound of leaves rustling, but only on one tree. A single, deliberate rustle in an orchard where nothing else moved. I stopped walking, and the tree that made the sound stopped too, as if it realized I was listening. I stood still long enough for my breath to soften, letting the quiet settle around me. The orchard remained perfectly motionless. Even the sky seemed to dim more slowly here, as though the valley refused to let the night fall too quickly. Yet my attention kept drifting back to that single rustle I had heard moments before. Brief, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. I took a step forward. The dry soil shifted beneath my shoe with a soft crunch. Then, somewhere ahead, swish, another rustle, from a different tree this time. I turned my head toward the sound, expecting to see movement. A branch swaying, cluster of leaves trembling. But the tree stood perfectly still. Not a single leaf quivered. It looked frozen in place. Caught mid-breath, I frowned, took another slow step. This time, the rustle didn't come from ahead. It came from my left. A soft, dragging whisper of leaves brushing against one another. Not chaotic, like wind, measured, slow. I looked over, expecting again to see movement, but the tree there was still, unmoving, as though it were carved from wood rather than grown from it. A shiver trailed up my arms. I stepped carefully between the rows, scanning for any sign of wildlife, a bird settling into its nest, a fox brushing past the undergrowth, even an insect disturbed by my steps. But I saw nothing alive, just rows upon rows of silent trees. Then I noticed something strange about their arrangement. In the dimming light, the orchard formed a near-perfect grid, too perfect for natural planting. Every tree aligned with the next, creating narrow corridors between them. But as I traced the lines with my eyes, I realized some trees didn't quite match the others. Their trunks tilted slightly inward, creating subtle angles as though leaning toward the central path, as though they had repositioned themselves. I tried to dismiss the thought. Trees didn't move. Not like that. But the feeling wouldn't leave me, a rising sense that the orchard wasn't merely surrounding me. It was watching. I whispered, almost involuntarily, "Is someone there?" There was no reply, but a new rustle drifted through the orchard, soft, slow, closer than all the others. A gentle tremor of leaves, directly behind me. I turned sharply. The tree closest to me stood still, its leaves unmoving. Yet I could swear the branches were a little closer than before, their tips reaching slightly inward as though they had shifted while my back was turned. I stepped away. The branches didn't follow, but the silence felt heavier, as though the orchard had registered my movement. Then, quietly, very quietly, another rustle came from deeper within the rows. this one longer, almost like a sigh. And for the first time, I had the uncomfortable sense that the sound wasn't made by leaves brushing together. It was made by something passing between them. I stood perfectly still, listening. The orchard had gone silent again, not the calm stillness of nature resting, but a silence that felt held, like dozens of unseen breaths waiting behind the unmoving leaves. I tried to convince myself that what I'd heard was an animal or the settling of branches cooling in the night air. But deep down, I already knew better. The next rustle didn't come from a single direction. It came from several places at once. Swish, swish, a slow, layered chorus of leaves brushing together. Like a whisper passed from one tree to the next. I turned in a slow circle. None of the trees moved. None of the leaves trembled. Yet the sound continued, weaving through the orchard in a steady rhythm, not drifting like wind, but traveling, as though something was walking. I stepped back instinctively, my foot pressed into soft soil, and the faint crunch echoed louder than it should have. The orchard reacted instantly. A rustle erupted from the row behind me, sharp and sudden, like leaves snapping into place. I spun around. The nearest tree now felt closer. A few inches, maybe more. Too subtle to be sure, but not subtle enough to dismiss. I whispered, "This isn't real." But the orchard disagreed. The rustling escalated, not louder, just nearer, closing around me in a thoughtful, deliberate pattern. The sound crept up the trunks, slipped through branches, traveled along leaves in smooth lines, forming almost a cadence. Left, then right, then behind me. It circled. I tried to walk back toward the path I'd entered from, but when I turned, the rows didn't seem to align anymore. The straight corridor of trees had become slightly crooked, their trunks angled inward, guiding me deeper rather than allowing me out. I ran my fingers along the rough bark of one tree. It was cold to the touch, colder than the night air, and the moment my skin brushed it, a faint tremor passed through the branches overhead. As though the tree were reacting to me, I stepped away quickly, heart hammering. The orchard answered with another slow rustle, this one heavier and lower. It rumbled through the ground, through the roots, through my feet. I realized then that the sound had changed pitch. Leaves rustling in wind have a soft, airy quality. But this was deeper, more resonant, as if the sound were rising from beneath the soil, climbing the trunks from the roots upward. The orchard was waking. I backed down a narrow row, trying to keep each tree in sight. The rustling followed, matching my pace perfectly, faster when I moved quickly, slower when I hesitated. It was no longer pretending to be the wind. It was synchronizing with me. The path narrowed further. Branches that had been high above my head now seemed lower, sloping inward like slow, reaching limbs. I ducked under one, only to realize the next row had shifted again. The alignment had changed while my head was down. A chill crawled up my spine. Then came the moment I knew I was no longer imagining any of this. A leaf fell. Just one. It drifted down in a slow spiral, landing lightly near my boot. I stared at it, waiting for the faint breeze that must have dislodged it to brush my skin. Nothing. No air. No movement. I knelt and picked it up, but the instant my fingers closed around the leaf, a violent shudder rippled through the branches overhead. Leaves rustled in every direction, rising into a panicked flurry, not chaotic, not random, but reactive. They shivered as though the entire row inhaled sharply. I dropped a leaf. The orchard exhaled. A deep, rolling rustle traveled outward, passing through dozens of trees at once, like a signal being sent across the valley. My breath froze in my chest. The orchard knew where I was. It knew what I had touched. And now, it was coming closer. The nearest tree creaked. Its trunk shifted, only a fraction, but enough that I saw the movement. Undeniable and deliberate. The roots groaning softly under the soil. Branches lowered just slightly, reaching, and in that moment, I understood. The rustling wasn't just following me. It was surrounding me. The orchard was closing in. I moved one step back, then another, until my spine pressed lightly against the trunk of a tree behind me. The bark was colder than before. Not the natural cold of night, but something deeper, a kind of stillness that felt intentionally withheld, as though the tree were trying not to react to my touch. I lifted my hand away quickly. The orchard rustled in response. A long, low solace passing from left to right, like breath drawn through 100 wooden throats. I whispered, "Stop, stop, please." The sound answered with unnerving obedience. Everything fell silent at once. No rustling, no trembling, just a blank, listening stillness. I took the chance to move, slipping sideways between two trunks. The space was narrower than it should have been. The branches overhead had shifted, knitting together into a loose canopy that filtered the faint moonlight into scattered shards. I ducked under one low-hanging branch, careful not to brush the leaves. But even that slight movement caused a faint tremor to ripple across the canopy. The trees were aware of me. Every step, every breath. Eventually, the rows opened into a small clearing at the orchard center, a circular patch of earth free of trees. At first, it seemed like a stroke of luck, an open space, a moment to breathe. But as I stepped into it, the silence thickened. The trees surrounding the clearing felt different. Older, their bark darker, knotted with strange ridges that looked almost like ribs pushing against skin. Their branches didn't reach outward. They leaned inward, angled toward the empty circle, as though bowing toward something long gone. I stepped to the center, and then I heard it. A rustle, not from the trees, but from the ground, beneath the soil. The sound rose slowly, like something turning in earth-packed darkness, disturbing roots and stones as it shifted its weight. The earth under my boots vibrated faintly, a subtle pulse moving outward in rings. I knelt, hesitating, and laid my palm on the soil. It was warm, a heartbeat, not steady, slow, uneven, as though waking from long sleep. I pulled my hand back sharply. The heartbeat paused, then resumed. That was when I realized the trees were not simply moving of their own accord. They were responding to this, the pulse beneath the ground. Each rustle I'd heard had been an echo, a reaction, a reflex tied to the thing buried underneath. The orchard wasn't hunting. It was protecting something, or obeying it. I stood quickly, scanning the surrounding trees. Every trunk leaned slightly inward, pointing toward me, or rather, toward the heartbeat beneath my feet. The rustling began again. Not chaotic, not circling. It was converging. Leaves trembled in a slow wave, traveling inward toward the clearing in concentric rings. The surrounding trees lowered their branches, forming a loose barrier, not to trap me, but to encourage me to stay exactly where I was. A branch brushed the back of my coat, gentle, guiding, as though returning me to the center when I took a half step outward. I froze in place, and then, from directly beneath me, the heartbeat stopped. A moment of weightless silence followed, deep and hollow. Then the soil shifted. Just a fraction. Just enough for a tiny crack to open beneath my left heel. A warm breath of air escaped the crack. Not wind, not gas. Air shaped by lungs. I stumbled back, but the trees reacted instantly, rustling in sharp unison. Branches lowering, crowding inward, pressing me back toward the center. I ducked instinctively, heart slamming in my chest, but each time I moved, the branches corrected me, guiding me gently but firmly toward the opening crack. I didn't understand what they wanted from me until I heard it. A voice, soft, childlike, calling from beneath the soil. Stay. The crack widened by another hair's breadth. Warmth seeped upward. The voice whispered again, clearer this time. You came back. I stared at the ground, horrified. I don't know you, I whispered. The trees rustled violently at my words, not punishing me, but reacting, agitated. The soil beneath me pulsed once more, and the voice rose with it. You do. Then, another sound. A rustle unlike any other I'd heard in the orchard. Not leaves, not branches. It was the sound of roots shifting, moving upward, reaching. I stepped backward in panic. The trees tightened around me. A living barrier. The voice beneath the soil grew soft again, almost pleading. Don't leave me. Not this time. And for the first time since entering the orchard, I felt something approaching the surface. Not with violence, with intention. I was standing over whatever it wanted to show me. For a moment, the orchard held its breath with me. Branches remained low, leaves trembling in anticipation, roots shifting faintly beneath the soil, like something enormous, turning in sleep. I stood frozen at the center of the clearing, staring at the thin crack in the earth where the warm air still rose. But then, as abruptly as it had begun, everything stopped. The warmth faded. The soil stilled. The heartbeat beneath the ground fell silent. Even the branches slowly lifted, retreating to their natural height with a long, tired rustle. The orchard loosened its enclosure around me, as though whatever had surfaced from below had made a decision to withdraw. I blinked, breath trembling in my lungs. The stillness that followed felt almost merciful, like the valley was finally allowing the night to settle. The faint silver glow of the rising moon filtered between the branches again. For the first time since arriving, the orchard looked ordinary. I whispered, barely trusting my voice. It's over. None of the trees reacted. I stepped backward cautiously, half expecting the branches to lower again. But they didn't. The corridor between the trunks remained open, leading toward the edge of the orchard, the same corridor I could have sworn had vanished earlier. Perhaps fear had twisted my perception. Perhaps the darkness had played tricks on me. The thought brought me a small, fragile sense of relief. I began walking steadily along the row. My steps sounded normal again, a soft crunch on the soil. Nothing more. No rustling followed. No shifting branches. No whisper rising from the ground. The valley felt like a place at rest, not the waking organism I had fled moments ago. I told myself. It was the isolation, the silence, the dark, anyone could imagine movement when surrounded by trees at night. I crossed halfway through the orchard before stopping to look back. The clearing lay quiet behind the rows, undisturbed. No strange angles, no encroaching branches. The trees looked exactly as trees should, rooted, anchored. Still, I sighed. A long, shaky exhale that released the tightness in my chest. I even managed to laugh, softly, nervously, at how absurd my panic had been. But the laugh died in my throat the moment I noticed something at my feet. A single leaf, freshly fallen, yet burning warm, as if it had been pressed against a living body only seconds ago. I dropped it immediately. The orchard remained silent. The warmth lingered in my fingers, unsettling but not enough to shatter the tentative calm that had begun to form around me. Perhaps the leaf had fallen earlier. When everything had been moving, I forced myself to continue walking. When I reached the orchard's entrance path, the one I had followed at dusk, I saw the caretaker's old wooden bench under the crooked lantern post. Relief washed through me. A sign of civilization, of structure, of human presence. The lantern flickered weakly, the way it had when I arrived, casting harmless amber glows over the ground. I sat on the bench, letting its familiar creak settle my nerves. The night air felt cooler here, less oppressive. I tilted my head back to look at the stars, grateful for the clear view beyond the canopy. My breathing steadied. I whispered, "I just need to rest a moment." That was when I heard a sound. Not rustling, not roots shifting, something far more mundane. A soft thud behind me, like something small dropping onto the bench. I turned, expecting a fallen twig. What I saw instead made every muscle in my body lock. A second leaf, placed neatly beside me, still warm. I stared at it, throat tightening. I hadn't seen it fall. I hadn't felt the bench shift under its weight. It was just there, gently laid, as though delivered. I stood slowly. The orchard stayed silent, unnervingly so. No branches moved. No leaves stirred. Everything remained perfectly still. A staged stillness. A waiting stillness. I backed away from the bench, heart pounding. The leaf on the wood glowed faintly in the lantern light, and for a moment I thought I saw a thin thread of soil clinging to its stem. Not from the branches, from below. Something beneath the ground had touched it and placed it beside me. The false calm shattered instantly, because the only thing worse than something trying to reach me is something that knows exactly where I will sit. The moment the warmth from that second leaf touched my fingertips, every sense in my body tightened at once. It felt impossibly fresh, as though it hadn't fallen from a branch, but been carried or passed directly from something living beneath the soil. I let the leaf slip from my hand. It landed silently on the ground. The orchard remained still, but not naturally so. Still like a held breath. Still like a decision being made. I took a single step backward toward the dirt path that led out of the valley. The lantern creaked above me, swaying slightly despite the absence of wind. Its faint light trembled across the orchard rows, catching on the leaves in tiny glints that made them look wet. Then the first sound came. A low, subterranean shudder. It traveled through the soil in a slow wave, passing beneath my boots and continuing deep into the orchard. The trees responded a moment later, rustling lightly, not loudly, not in panic, but in an unsettling synchrony, the way a sleeping creature might stretch its limbs after being roused too abruptly. I whispered, "No, No, stay calm, as though the orchard might listen. The ground trembled again, harder this time. A slow rise, a sinking fall, a pulse. The heartbeat had returned, except now it was enormous. I turned and began walking quickly up the path. Not running, not yet. Running felt like the worst possible choice. The kind of movement prey makes when it has already been marked. The lantern's glow trailed behind me, stretching my shadow long and thin on the ground. Then I heard the leaves. Not the rustle of wind, not branches brushing, but the sound from earlier, the one I had tried to deny. Leaves parting. Something moving between them. Swish, swish, swisses, sh. Approaching. I broke into a run. The path ahead seemed clear, but trees that had stood neatly along the edges now leaned inward, their branches reaching just enough to brush the air above me. I ducked under one, sprinting harder, but the rustling followed, closing the distance in smooth, gliding waves. I looked back. A shape moved between the trunks, not solid, not fully visible. A ripple of darkness weaving through the orchard as the trees recoiled, then swayed inward again. The ground shuddered a third time. This one was violent. I stumbled, knees buckling, hands scraping the dirt. Pain flared up my palms, but I pushed myself up and kept running. My breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. The orchard answered with an even deeper rumble, as though something beneath it were rising. Then the path collapsed. Not fully, just a small, sudden dip in the soil a few meters ahead of me, as though a massive root had shifted underneath, displacing the earth. Dust lifted into the air in a pale cloud. I skid to a stop right before the sunken patch, and the voice rose again from below, soft, patient, far clearer than before. You left me. I backed up, heart pounding. I don't know you, I whispered, breath trembling. The soil answered with a faint, warm exhale, a reply shaped like breath over lips. You do. The rustling around me intensified, spreading outward in concentric circles. The orchard was no longer following me, it was positioning itself. Branches lowered, trunks leaned, leaves trembled like fingertips readying themselves to close in. I turned and ran off the main path, cutting through a row of trees, not caring any more about direction, only distance. Branches reached for me as I passed, brushing my sleeves, my hair, my neck. A few snagged my coat, tugging gently, not hard enough to stop me, but enough to slow me, enough to guide. The heartbeat boomed beneath the soil, so close now that I felt it in my knees. The voice came again, rising in a whisper that traveled along the roots. Please, don't go. I pushed through one row, then another. My breathing grew ragged. The rows were tightening, closing. Root lines shifted under the ground, turning into obstacles, ridges, shallow ridge-like patterns that made my footing unstable. It felt less like running on soil and more like stepping on the ribs of a buried giant. The rustling moved faster now. The unseen shape glided between the trunks behind me, brushing leaves aside as it came. Every time it passed a tree, that tree shuddered, shedding a few warm leaves that spiraled toward the ground. The orchard wasn't trying to stop me violently. It was trying to bring me back. You came here before, the voice whispered. I didn't. I gasped, tripping over an exposed root. I landed hard on my palms. The ground pulsed beneath me like the slow exhale of something vast and buried. "You did," the voice insisted, gentle yet certain, "and you promised not to leave again." The soil beneath my left hand warmed. The crack opened, just enough for a fingertip-sized gap. Something brushed my skin from below. Soft. Warm. I screamed and pushed myself backward, crawling through the dirt until my hands found open space again. The rustling crescendoed into a rushing sound, leaves cascading in waves, branches bending downward, trunks leaning. The orchard was collapsing inward. I forced myself to my feet and ran toward the faintest break in the canopy, a patch of sky barely visible between two sloping trunks. I dove toward it. Squeezing between the narrowing gap, bark scraped my arms. Leaves brushed my cheeks like hands. But then, an open slope, grass, the edge of the orchard. I stumbled into the clearing beyond the tree line, collapsing onto the ground. Cold night air rushed around me, real air, with wind, gentle and natural and blessedly indifferent. Behind me, the orchard stilled. Every branch lifted, every leaf froze, every rustle ceased, as though nothing had ever moved. I lay there shaking, staring at the dark rows between the trunks. Then the voice drifted out once more, not from the ground, not from the roots, from the trees themselves. Soft, faint, almost sorrowful. "You'll come back." I stayed on the cold grass for several minutes, letting the trembling in my limbs settle. The orchard loomed behind me like a single dark wall, silent, motionless, impossible to believe capable of what I had just witnessed. The wind here in the open valley brushed against my skin, gentle and real, a stark contrast to the breathless stillness inside the trees. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs barely held me, but the thought of lingering near the edge of that place felt worse than the exhaustion pulling at my bones. I walked toward the narrow track leading back to the caretaker's cabin, glancing over my shoulder more times than I'd like to admit. The orchard didn't move. Not a branch. Not a leaf. It looked innocent under the moonlight. Too innocent. Halfway up the path, I slowed. The cabin lights glowed faintly in the distance. Warm. Steady. Human. Relief eased the tightness in my chest. Each step brought me farther from the orchard and closer to safety. That was when I noticed the footprints. Not mine. My boots left deep, uneven impressions in the damp soil. But alongside them, spaced perfectly, was another set, smaller, narrower, as though made by bare feet. They followed my trail from the orchard's edge, and I hadn't heard anyone behind me. I knelt down, heart pounding softly against my ribs. The prints were fresh, edges crisp, undisturbed by wind. When I touched one gently, expecting cold mud, it felt warm as the leaves that had been placed beside me. I rose slowly, scanning the path behind. No movement, no figure, only the orchard, standing in perfect stillness. Then the wind shifted. A rare breeze passed across the valley, stirring the grass and the edges of my coat. The sound should have been comforting, the normal hush of night air moving freely, but carried within it, faint enough to doubt and clear enough to fear, came a soft rustle. Swiss, not from the wind, from the orchard, and beneath that rustle, very faintly, almost buried inside the breeze. "You forgot something." I froze. The wind stilled. The orchard fell silent again. The footprints behind me remained warm. Whatever had reached for me beneath the soil was no longer confined to the orchard. It was following Story 3, the railway that never passed here. I rented a small guest room in the old village because I wanted silence. That was the only thing the locals promised with certainty, a silence so deep you could hear your thoughts settle like dust. And for the first few hours, it was exactly that. The night stretched quietly across the countryside, the darkness soft and undisturbed. But just after midnight, while I was sitting by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea, a sound drifted through the air, a low metallic hum, soft at first, barely more than a vibration. Then, the distant screech of wheels grinding against metal. I frowned. There were no train tracks here, no stations, no routes within miles. The village itself sat on a steep hillside where a railway could never have been built. Yet the sound grew clearer. A whistle, long, old-fashioned, rising from the valley below. Then rhythmic clattering, the unmistakable cadence of a train approaching a platform. I leaned closer to the open window, listening. And that was when I heard something even more unsettling. Announcements, indistinct, echoing, as though spoken through a broken tannoy system, calling for passengers that no longer existed. The rails had never been here, but the train was arriving. I stayed by the window longer than I should have, holding my breath as the strange sounds threaded through the otherwise empty night. The metal-on-metal screech came again, sharper this time, echoing far louder than any real train should at such a distance. It was impossible, and yet there it was. I leaned out slightly, letting the cool hillside air brush my face. The valley below lay dark and untouched, a wide expanse of grass and scattered farmhouses. No lights, no tracks, no raised earthworks, not even the suggestion of old rails long removed. Just quiet land that had never known the vibration of a locomotive. But the vibration found me. A deep tremor rose through the air, subtle enough to question, strong enough to feel. My teacup rattled faintly against the windowsill. I turned toward it, watching the ceramic quiver, the liquid inside trembling like something responding to distant thunder. Except there was no thunder, only that mechanical hum, growing steadier, closer. I whispered, "This can't be real." A second whistle cut through the night, longer, more mournful, as though passing through thick fog. The sound bent strangely, distorted in a way that made it hard to locate. It came from the left, then the right, then straight ahead all at once, like the valley itself didn't know where to place it. I closed the window, hoping the thick glass would muffle it. It didn't. If anything, the sound became clearer, as though the pain amplified what it should have blocked. Behind the whistle came a faint rhythm of footsteps. Not human footsteps. A crowd. Dozens. Maybe more. Their approach was soft, yet unmistakable. The shuffle of people gathering on a platform. A platform that wasn't there. I stepped back from the window, breath tight in my chest. The guest room seemed to shift slightly around me, the wooden floor bending under a subtle vibration. Then I heard a faint voice through the glass. Platform 1, final boarding. I froze. The announcement was old-fashioned, delivered in a clipped, formal tone that didn't match any modern station I'd ever known. The words echoed across the valley, as though spoken through a speaker older than the village itself. I whispered, "Who are you calling?" The reply was immediate. a low burst of static, ending in a short click. The unmistakable sound of a microphone being switched off. Then silence. For a moment I let myself believe the noise had stopped for good. My heartbeat slowed. The room steadied. The floorboards stopped trembling. Even the glass in the window fell into stillness. I exhaled. That was when the second announcement came. Late passenger detected. My skin went cold. A long pause followed, too long, like the system was waiting for something. Then, quietly, adjusting arrival, the metallic hum swelled, rising beneath the floor, spreading up the walls, humming through the glass, as though the train, whatever it was no longer in the valley. It was coming toward me. The walls of the room began to tremble, gently at first, like the building was reacting to distant thunder. But the vibrations grew steadier, settling into a rhythm so precise, so unmistakably mechanical, that my breath caught in my throat. Clack, 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 the sound of wheels striking rail joints, except there were no rails within miles. The floorboards quivered beneath my feet. A cup on the bedside table rattled softly, inching closer to the edge with each tremor. The glass window no longer reflected the moonlight cleanly. Every pulse distorted it, bending the light as if the pane were subtly warping under pressure. I stepped back until my shoulders touched the wall. The vibrations followed me. The next sound was deeper, a low metallic groan, rolling through the valley and pressing itself against the walls of the guest room. It was the sound of a train applying its brakes, long and heavy, the kind that belonged to aged iron wheels and rusted tracks. I whispered, "There's nothing out there, nothing." But my voice shook, swallowed instantly by the hum that now filled the room. The lights flickered. The mirror above the dresser trembled in tiny shivers. Then, something new. A hiss. Soft at first, then louder. A pressurized exhale. Unmistakably the release of steam. A steam engine. An impossibility. Yet its breath filled the night outside my window, brushing against the glass as though it were condensing on real, physical metal. I forced myself forward and pressed a hand against the window. The glass felt cold, but beneath that cold, I sensed a faint warmth, the kind forged by friction, by movement, by machinery in motion. Then the voice came again, arriving now. The announcement vibrated through the window, through the floorboards, through me, not spoken normally, broadcast, as though emitted through a tannoy system that no longer existed. The valley itself echoed in response, as if repeating words it had memorized decades ago. The room darkened, not sharply, more like a shadow passing slowly in front of the house. A massive silhouette, tall, rectangular, moving at a crawl. My breath faltered. Something was blocking the moonlight. I leaned closer to the window, trying to see through the distortion in the glass. I saw nothing at first, only the dark sweep of the valley. But then, gradually, faint outlines formed. A row of windows, carriage windows, long, narrow, evenly spaced. But the glass inside them wasn't lit. It flickered, as if catching flashes of a world that wasn't there. I stepped back, instinctively. The announcement returned, closer, sharper. Prepare to board. The air thinned in the room. My ears popped. Pressure built, heavy and invasive, like the cabin of an aeroplane descending too quickly. Then came the footsteps. Not one or two, dozens, A slow, shuffling crowd walking on gravel, except the valley below was grass. The sound rose up the hillside, unhurried but collective. The unmistakable weight of passengers approaching a platform. Approaching me, I stood frozen, listening. Step, step, 100 shoes brushing stone, 100 breaths, 100 presences moving in unison. But when I dared to look out the window again, the hillside was empty. The shapes I had thought were shadows were gone. The flickering carriage lights vanished. The footsteps stopped. And then, with perfect clarity, the tannoy crackled again. Passenger identified. Upstairs window. My throat closed. The announcement was not vague this time. It was speaking about me. Something clicked in the walls. A sharp metallic sound. Then another. Then dozens. Cascading one after another like old relay switches snapping into place. The building had begun powering on, or being powered by something outside. The final message came so quietly that I felt it in my bones more than heard it. Doors opening. The valley exhaled steam, and something very large shifted outside the house. The house groaned as though something heavy had leaned against its outer wall. I stepped away from the window, my breath catching in the thickening air. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied into a dim, amber glow, too warm, too deliberate, as if powered by an external source rather than the building's old wiring. A hiss curled along the outside of the wall. Steam, dense and wet, rolling upward from ground level. I whispered, "There is no platform, there is no train." But the house answered with another metallic clunk, deeper, closer. The kind a carriage door would make when its lock disengages. Then, Glen, clack, 3 doors, opening in sequence. I pressed myself against the far wall, listening. The footsteps outside resumed, not climbing the hillside anymore, but pacing directly beneath the window. Heavy shoes on gravel, then softer ones. Boots, heels, worn leather soles. The sound layered into a faint murmuring pattern, like dozens of travelers shifting their weight in anticipation. The problem was simple and terrifying. The valley had no gravel. Something was creating the sound, or replaying it. I inched toward the doorway, ready to flee the room. But the hallway beyond flickered with the same amber glow, as though lit by lamps that didn't belong in this century. A faint electrical buzz vibrated along the floorboards, rising through the soles of my feet. Then the tannoy voice returned. Final call for passenger. The speaker crackled. Static chewed the words. Then, in the upstairs room my lungs seized. The announcement wasn't searching anymore. It had found me. I stumbled backward into the room just as the hallway lights dimmed to a rust-colored pulse, beating in slow, rhythmic flashes, like the blinking signal at an old platform crossing. A colder sound followed, one that didn't belong to any train I knew. The soft slide of metal against metal, a latch turning, a handle lowering. From the front door, someone or something was letting itself in. "No," I whispered, stepping farther from the hallway. The front door creaked open. A long, slow breath of night air drifted into the house. Footsteps entered, definite, measured, moving with purpose down the corridor. Not shuffling, not dragging. These steps were practiced, almost formal, the mannered gait of someone who had boarded trains their whole life. But when the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, they stopped. paused, then began to climb. Each step landed with an old-fashioned weight, hard-soled shoes on creaky wooden risers. Slow, unhurried, as though following a timetable, the tannoy crackled softly. As if aware of the ascent, I backed up until my shoulders pressed into the cold wall beside the window. My breath fogged the air. The temperature had plunged without warning. The footsteps reached the landing. A second pair followed, then a third, an entire invisible crowd moving to the upper floor. I whispered into the silence, "Stop, stop, please." Everything stopped. Absolute stillness. Then a single, deliberate step landed in the hallway outside my room. It was right at the threshold. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I held my breath. A soft tapping sound began, not on the door, but on the wall. 3 taps, evenly spaced. A pattern, not a warning, a request to open. I stared at the door handle. It didn't turn. It didn't rattle. It simply waited. The tapping came again, this time slower. Then the tannoy voice slipped through the walls. Quiet and patient. "Please stand by." Steam hissed beneath the window, this time louder, carrying warmth. Against every instinct I had, I turned toward the glass and froze. The window no longer showed the valley. It showed the outline of a platform that shouldn't exist. Dimly lit, ghostly, blurred like an old photograph half remembered. Figures stood along it, silhouettes of passengers not fully formed, flickering in and out of visibility like projections from a broken slide carousel. One silhouette faced me directly, still, unmoving, watching. Then the window rattled violently, drowning out my breath. A heavy metal presence scraped along the outside wall, as though a carriage were shifting closer. The reflection of its headlamp, yellow, glassy, impossibly bright, flared across the floorboards of my room. The tannoy emitted a final whisper, doors closing in 10 seconds. But this countdown wasn't mechanical anymore. It was personal. Something wanted me on that train, and it had come all the way to my door to collect me. I braced myself for the door to open, for the rattling window to shatter inward, for the unseen passengers to flood the room. But nothing happened. No handle turning, no footsteps, no more tapping on the wall. Just silence. A thick, padded silence, as though someone had placed soft cloth over the entire world. The amber glow in the hallway flickered once, then dimmed into an ordinary, pale light. The mechanical hum vanished. Even the pressure in the air eased, allowing my lungs to expand fully for the first time in minutes. I stepped forward cautiously, expecting the window to show the phantom platform again. But when I looked, the valley had returned. The hillside was empty, moonlit, completely still. No silhouettes, no ghostly carriages, no flickering headlamp, only the landscape I had seen when I first arrived. I leaned both hands against the windowsill, exhaling hard. My breath rattled in my chest before settling. I wiped condensation from the glass with my sleeve and let myself stare at the quiet view for as long as I needed. "It's over," I whispered. The room answered with stillness. I waited for a minute. 2, 5. Nothing changed. Finally, I worked up the nerve to approach the door. My hand hesitated on the handle for a long, trembling moment before I pushed it down gently. The latch clicked normally. Warm hallway air met my skin. The corridor outside was empty, lit by the guest house's quaint, flickering sconces. No amber glow, no impression of footsteps, no cold breath of steam. I stepped out. The floorboards creaked in their familiar, harmless way. The stairs were quiet. The entryway was dark. The front door was closed, locked, undisturbed. I almost laughed from the weight of the relief. Halfway down the stairs, my legs finally began to shake with the release. I gripped the railing, breathing deeply as I descended each step. When I reached the bottom, I walked slowly to the front door just to reassure myself. I touched the handle, then the frame. Everything was solid, real. There were no wet footprints, no signs of visitors, no trace of steam. The house was just an old house again. I whispered into the quiet. It was all in my head, but a part of me, the part still trembling at the memory of the platform appearing in the window, knew that wasn't completely true. Still, exhaustion washed over me. I needed to lie down, to clear my mind, to let my senses return to normal. The sofa in the little sitting room looked softer than any bed had ever seemed. I sank into it, closed my eyes, listened to the room breathe in its natural rhythm. No hum, no scraping metal, no tannoy, just a house at rest. Minutes passed. The fear retreated into a distant ache beneath my ribs. Eventually, I opened my eyes, and that was when I saw it. A small detail, so ordinary it almost didn't register. On the coffee table beside the sofa sat a metal trinket, a charm, shaped like a tiny railway token. It hadn't been there before. I reached out with a hesitant hand, touching it with the tip of my finger. It was cold at first, then the metal warmed rapidly. The exact warmth I had felt through the window glass when the phantom train approached. My breath caught. A faint vibration ticked through the trinket, traveling into my fingertip. Then, so soft it could have been imagined, a distant announcement whispered from nowhere. Platform 2. I jerked my hand back. The room remained still. The token lay quietly on the table, as harmless as any forgotten souvenir. But its warmth lingered on my skin, a warmth that didn't belong in a silent village, a warmth that felt like movement, like something was still on its way. The warmth from the metal token pulsed against my fingertip long after I'd pulled my hand away. A slow, rhythmic throb too deliberate to be residual heat, too measured to be accidental. The tiny disc sat on the coffee table like an innocuous souvenir, but with each passing second, it felt less like an object and more like a signal. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm not boarding anything." The token answered by vibrating again. A single pulse, then silence. A floorboard creaked overhead. I froze. The guest house was supposed to be empty. The caretaker had locked up hours ago. No one else had checked in for the season. Another creak, heavier, closer to the stairs. I rose from the sofa, moving quietly, my heartbeat drumming a jittery rhythm beneath my ribs. The sitting room door gave a soft groan as I pushed it open. The hallway beyond lay still, lit only by the muted glow of a small wall lamp. I waited. A footstep sounded above me, slow, measured, exactly like the formal, deliberate steps I had heard earlier when the phantom passengers had climbed the staircase. "No," I whispered, backing into the sitting room. "You're gone." The train left. The tracks, they don't exist. but the steps descended. Each one landed with the weight of someone accustomed to disembarking, heels striking the wood first, then the soles settling with practiced finality. Not rushing, not staggering, just arriving. I stumbled backward until my calves hit the sofa. I grabbed the token instinctively, intending to throw it across the room. But the moment my fingers curled around it, the air pressure changed. The lamp flickered. The walls vibrated. A low hum seeped into the floorboards. A familiar hum. Metal on metal. A train engine. Idling. I dropped the token in panic. It landed with a metallic ping that echoed far too loudly for such a small object. The footsteps paused mid-stair. The entire house seemed to hold its breath. Then the tannoy returned. Not distant this time. Not filtered by the valley. Inside the house. Passenger, ready. The walls trembled as though the announcement had been pumped directly through them. I covered my ears, but the voice wasn't coming from outside. It resonated inside my skull, vibrating behind my eyes. I ran. I didn't care where. I didn't care how. I sprinted toward the front door, fumbling with the lock. My fingers shook violently as I turned the key. But the moment the mechanism clicked open, a gust of hot steam hissed through the keyhole, burning my palm. I yelped and staggered back. The house groaned. Through the front window, the valley had changed again. No hillside. No dark open land. A platform, long, shadowed, lit by flickering lamps bending under a fog no weather should produce. Passengers stood along its silhouettes in period clothing, flickering like projections on ruined film. Some faced forward. Some stood in profile, but many stared directly at the house, heads tilted, as though waiting for the door to open. I backed away from the window. No, I'm not supposed to be part of this. But the tannoy answered. You were always scheduled. The front door handle turned slowly, not violently, not aggressively, measured, patient. A hand unseen was testing the latch from outside. I bolted toward the back of the house. The kitchen door, the cellar, anywhere without windows facing the phantom platform. The kitchen's small rear door came into view like salvation. I grabbed the handle and froze. It was warm, warmer than any metal should be at night. I yanked my hand back. The warmth lingered, pulsing like a heartbeat. The floor beneath my feet vibrated. Not an earthquake, not machinery. The vibration of heavy wheels gliding along tracks that should not exist. I stumbled to the side, nearly knocking over a chair. My breath came sharp and uneven. Steam curled from the cracks beneath the back door, rising in gentle spirals like exhaled breath. I whispered, "Please, I'm not the passenger. I'm not..." The tannoy interrupted. Approached the carriage. Final call. I shook my head violently. No. Then, faintly from beyond the back door, came a sound I hadn't yet heard this night. The long, slow creak of a carriage door sliding open. Metal dragging. Heavy. Ancient. The door wasn't waiting for my approach. It was inviting. Reaching. I stepped away from the door and stepped onto something that rolled underfoot. The token. It lay directly behind me, though I had left it on the coffee table. I stared at it, horrified. The metal vibrated faintly, like it was alive. A tiny hiss escaped from it, a miniature version of the steam outside. I backed away again, toward the center of the room. wanting to flee without any idea where to flee to. Then the house shifted, not metaphorically. The walls moved. The floorboards rolled beneath my feet like a platform edge adjusting alignment. The ceiling hummed with tension, and the windows began to stretch, elongating horizontally, narrowing vertically, until they resembled train carriage windows. I clutched the edge of the dining table to stay upright. The house wasn't being invaded by the train. The house was becoming part of it, a carriage forming around me. No, stop, stop. Steam flooded the hallway. A shadow crossed the window, long, rectangular, unmistakably the silhouette of an engine. The tannoy whispered, right beside my ear. Bored now, I slammed myself toward the side exit, the storage door. Barely used, nearly hidden behind shelves. My hands fumbled at the latch. It stuck. I yanked again. The wood cracked. A third time harder. The door burst open. Cold night air poured in. I ran, straight into the dark field behind the house. Steam chased me. Footsteps that weren't my own pounded the earth around me. A whistle screamed somewhere behind my ribs. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs knotted, until my legs burned, until the house and the impossible railway vanished behind the rolling fog that hugged the hillside. Only when the sounds of metal and steam finally died did I collapse onto the cold grass, shaking uncontrollably. The valley lay silent again, utterly still, but the warmth on my palm remained, and when I opened my hand, the metal token was inside it. I hadn't picked it up. It had traveled with me. I lay on the cold hillside for a long time, staring up at the sky that felt far too quiet after what had chased me. My breathing slowed eventually, though my chest still trembled with every shallow exhale. Somewhere below the ridge, the guest house stood silent again, just a dark shape against the valley, as harmless as an old photograph. But the token in my palm never cooled. I closed my fingers around it, feeling its warmth pulse gently, steadily, as though syncing with something beneath the earth. A timetable, a schedule, a heartbeat of iron and steam. "I'm not going back," I whispered. The wind didn't answer, but the token did. It vibrated once, like a tiny engine turning over. I scrambled to sit upright, staring at it under the moonlight. Its surface shimmered faintly, just a thin line of reflected silver, but enough to catch my breath. For a moment, I thought I saw an engraving appear where there had been none. Platform 3. Due? I blinked. The word vanished. The metal returned to blank. My pulse thudded against my throat. I dropped the token into the grass beside me. It landed silently, disappearing into the dark blades. But the moment I stood, something clattered softly behind me. I turned. The token sat at my heel, as if it had rolled there, but the ground was flat, and I hadn't heard it move. "No," I whispered, backing away. "Leave me alone. I'm not part of this." The valley responded with a faint echo. Not a train, not metal, not steam. Something subtler. A click, like a switch being flipped somewhere beneath the earth. Then a distant whistle, not from behind me, not from the guest house, from up the hillside, where no tracks should ever exist. The air thickened, humming faintly. The grass trembled around my ankles. I lifted my foot to run, and that was when the token gave a final, soft pulse. A whisper, almost kind, almost relieved, slipped into the night. Next departure confirmed. I froze, because the voice hadn't come from the token. It had come from behind me, from the dark ridge, where the outline of a carriage window, long, narrow, impossibly high, flickered once in the moonlight, then vanished. Story 4. The library that rearranged my memories. I arrived at the town library late in the evening, long after the last visitors had left. The caretaker had allowed me to stay after hours to conduct research, but the moment he locked the glass doors behind me, the quiet inside felt different. Not empty, arranged. The smell of old paper drifted through the aisles, soft and powdery, like dust dreaming. The lamps hummed faintly in their glass casings, casting a warm amber glow on neatly ordered shelves. I walked toward the reading table in the center hall, pulling out the chair carefully so the legs wouldn't scrape. Even the smallest sound felt intrusive. The library seemed to prefer silence. It felt practiced, as though silence was something it had trained for. I opened my notebook. The page stared up at me, blank and patient. Then I heard it. A page turning. Soft. Measured. Somewhere deep in the stacks. At first I thought it was the ventilation or the settling of old books. But the sound came again slow. Deliberate. Like someone reading with intention. Another page turned. Then another. I stood up slowly. Because every shelf in the library was perfectly still, but the books were reading themselves. I stepped out from the reading table, letting the soft hum of the lamps settle behind me. The sound of the turning page had stopped the moment I stood up, leaving the library unnervingly still, like a room holding its breath after being caught doing something it shouldn't. I waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, flip. A single, slow turn of paper. This time closer. I turned toward the aisle to my right. The shelves there rose in strict rows, casting narrow shadows between them that felt tighter than before. My footsteps were soft on the carpet, but even they sounded unwelcome, swallowed by the heavy hush of the room. I reached the mouth of the aisle and peered in. Books sat motionless, spines unbroken, dust undisturbed, but the air felt the way the air feels when someone has just left, a faint warmth hanging where a body should be. Then, deeper between the shelves, flip, another page, longer this time, as though a heavy book was being opened wider. I whispered, "Hello." My voice didn't echo. It simply dissolved. I walked slowly down the aisle, running my fingers lightly along the spines for balance. Some were cool, untouched for years. Others felt warmer, as though someone had recently pulled them from the shelves and set them back without much care. Halfway down, I saw something odd. One book protruded slightly, only a centimeter or two, but enough to disrupt the perfect uniformity of the row. The color of its spine was darker than the rest, soaked in a deep, velvety green that swallowed the light. I reached for it, before my fingertips touched the cover. The page-turning sound came again, but from behind me. I spun around. The aisle was empty, but a book on the opposite shelf now jutted out slightly, as though nudged. I swallowed hard and carefully slid the green book free. Its weight surprised me heavy, as if the pages were thicker than normal paper. I opened it cautiously. The first page was blank. No title, no author, just a thin impression, as though something had once been written there but had been removed or moved. I turned the page. Blank again. I flipped through more quickly. Blank. Blank, blank, until halfway through, where a single, faint ink line curved across the paper like the beginning of a sentence that had wandered off the edge. "What were you supposed to say?" I whispered. The lamps flickered gently. Then, behind me in the aisle, 5 or 6 pages turned in rapid succession, creating a fluttering rush of sound like wings beating softly. I snapped the green book shut and held it to my chest. The aisle grew colder. As I turned to leave, I saw it. Another book pulled halfway out. Not the same shelf. Not even the same aisle. A soft scraping sound echoed from the back of the library, as though dozens of books were shifting in unison, subtle, careful, rearranging themselves just out of sight. And far in the dark, a single page turned slowly. Not random, not settled, waiting. The flutter of pages moved through the library like a whisper carried on invisible rails, traveling from one aisle to the next in a slow, deliberate wave. I clutched the heavy green book tighter, the leather cover warming faintly under my palm as though responding to the rising tension in the air. The sound came again. Flip, 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 flip. Not chaotic, not hurried. Rhythmic, as if dozens of unseen readers were turning pages in perfect unison. I stepped backward until the heel of my shoe brushed the carpeted edge of the aisle. The ambient hum of the lamps softened, dimming in a strange synchrony with the page turning. Shadows lengthened across the floor, stretching between the shelves like quiet sentinels. The fluttering stopped. Then, a single, crisp page turned directly above me. I jerked my head up. A mezzanine level circled the library, lined with metal railings and older reference shelves. The lights up there had dimmed to a deep amber glow, barely enough to see shapes. But in the faint glow, I saw something impossible. One book lay open on the floor of the upper balcony. Open, its pages moving gently, folding over on their own. No wind, no ventilation, nothing near it. Yet the pages drifted, pausing, turning, pausing again, like someone lying invisible beside it was reading with great patience. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered. The balcony book stopped turning immediately, as if listening. The lamps flickered. A soft scraping noise followed metal on metal, the sound of a book sliding an inch across the floorboards. And then another scrape, and another, from the balcony to the far corner, from that corner to the next. Books shifting, aligning, forming a pattern I couldn't yet see. I forced myself to look away and stepped deeper into the main hall, toward the tall reference shelves. My footsteps made the faintest thud on the carpet, but even that was enough to trigger a reaction. The shelves ahead of me exhaled, not literally, but the air pushed out with a slow, soft sigh, as though dozens of pages had puffed forward in a gentle, unified breath. Flip. A single page turned at the end of the aisle, then another behind me, then 3 more to my left. The sound danced around me, circling like a child, playing hide and seek in the aisles. I turned slowly, feeling as though the shelves were rotating with me. The layout seemed wrong, slightly narrower than before, as though the books themselves had grown thicker, pushing the shelves outward. The green book in my hand pulsed once, a soft warmth against my ribs. "Tell me what you are," I whispered. In response, a wave of page turns cascaded outward, a sweeping sound that rippled from one end of the library to the other, like an applause performed with nothing but paper. The sound settled into a steady rhythm. Flip, flip, flip. Slow, patient, precise, like a heartbeat made of parchment. The lamps dimmed further, casting the aisles into deeper amber shadows. The far corner of the library flickered once, then vanished into near darkness. As I stepped cautiously toward the central rotunda, the sound changed again. A new layer emerged beneath the turning pages. A soft tap, then another, like fingers drumming gently on a tabletop. No, not fingers. Spines. Books shuffling themselves forward, rearranging. The far shelves shifted almost imperceptibly, just a few millimeters, but enough that the endless rows no longer lined up perfectly. They angled, all toward me. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Pages turned faster. The fluttering turned into a low, continuous rustle that filled the air like 1,000 whispered conversations. I held the green book out in front of me, as though it might shield me. Its spine warmed again. Then, dozens of books slid outward at once. A soft, collective thud echoed through the aisles as their spines aligned, pointing toward the rotunda where I stood. The flickering lights caught their gold lettering rows of titles glinting with eerie uniformity. Then every open book in sight turned a page at the same moment. Flip. The sound struck the room like a pulse. My breath caught. My fingers tightened around the green book, because for the first time since arriving, I felt something clear and unmistakable. The library wasn't rearranging itself. It was rearranging me, and it wasn't finished. Not yet. The unified flip of 100 pages echoed through the rotunda, settling into the air like dust made of sound. I stood very still, clutching the green book to my chest, as though it were an anchor holding me in place while the rest of the library realigned itself with a quiet, patient purpose. For a moment, no book moved, no pages turned, no shelves shifted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was focused, as though the entire building was waiting for my next decision. I took a tentative step forward. Immediately, a book on the nearest shelf slid outward by a few centimeters. A gentle nudge, as if indicating a direction. I stared at it. Another book beside it followed suit, sliding out with a soft scrape. Then a third. A path began to form, not through the aisles, but between specific books, marking a winding line that led deeper into the stacks. "Is this for me?" I whispered. Every book within my line of sight turned a page at the exact same moment. Flip. The sound was quieter this time, more intimate, as if the answer were yes. I hesitated. This felt like stepping into a trap built from memory and dust. But the green book throbbed faintly in my grip, a slow warmth radiating through its spine, almost guiding, almost urging. I followed. The path the books created guided me through aisles that had felt familiar moments ago, but now seemed unnervingly narrow. The shelves had drawn slightly closer together, not enough to trap, enough to shepherd. Every few steps, a new book slid forward, marking the next turn. Somewhere deeper in the library, a steady rhythm of page turning resumed, slow now, measured, like a teacher reading aloud to a class. Flip, flip, flip. I turned the corner into one of the smallest archival corridors, where the shelves were older and mismatched, their wood darker, their corners softened by decades of use. The lamps here glowed faintly, dust swirling lazily in their light. The page-flipping sound grew louder. Close, too close. A thin draft moved past my face, the first movement of air I had felt since entering the library. It carried the scent of old glue and ink, and something else. Something almost metallic. I reached the end of the corridor and stopped. An open book lay on the floor. It wasn't a normal library book. Its cover was cracked, handwritten rather than printed, and open to a page filled with dense text written in looping cursive. The words looked familiar, painfully familiar. I knelt slowly, eyes straining in the dimness. Line by line, the handwriting resolved into clarity. It was my handwriting. My notes, I whispered. But I never wrote these. The green book in my hands pulsed once quickly, urgently. I glanced down at it. The leather cover gleamed faintly, as though catching light that wasn't there. I hesitated, then opened it to the first blank page. It wasn't blank anymore. Words were appearing, fading in as though rising to the surface of the paper. You returned. I froze. The air thickened. From the shelves around me, the fluttering of pages escalated. Books opening, books closing, books shifting in their sockets like animals unsettled by a scent. My heart pounded against my ribs. I've never been here before, I whispered. I haven't. The library reacted instantly. Every book within reach snapped shut at once. Thud. Dust burst into the air like a startled gasp. Lights flickered. Somewhere overhead, a heavy tome slid across metal with the long groan of something ancient waking from rest. The green book warmed sharply in my hands, as if urging me to keep reading. The next line emerged on the page, forming letter by ghostly letter. You forgot. My breath trembled. I didn't forget anything. But another line appeared beneath the first. Neat and merciless. Not your memories. The pages around me erupted into motion, the sound rising into a storm of turning paper. Flip, 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 flip. A frenzy. Yet not chaotic. Purposeful. Books were opening themselves all along the shelves, pages riffling with growing speed. The air churned with invisible wind, though the lamps didn't sway. The open book on the floor turned another page on its own, then another, then stopped on a page with a date. A date I recognized. A date I had tried very hard never to think about again. No, I whispered. This isn't mine. This isn't. The lights died. For one breathless second, the library plunged into darkness. Then a single lamp flared to life directly above me, illuminating only the open book at my feet and the green book in my hands. The page in the floor book shifted again. A name appeared. My name? And beneath it, missing. The shelves creaked inward, wood flexing subtly, like ribs closing around a heart. Then, somewhere behind the shelves, footsteps, not heavy, not human, paper thin, soft, approaching. I realized then, I wasn't discovering the library's secret. The library had been waiting for me to remember mine, and it was done waiting. The footsteps, those thin, papery steps kept approaching through the darkened stacks, each one no louder than the brush of a finger along a page. I held my breath, gripping the green book so tightly my knuckles ached. The lamp above me flickered again, threatening to sink me into darkness with whatever was moving. Then, without warning, the entire storm of pages stilled. The book stopped turning. The fluttering ceased. The air, thick with motion moments ago, calmed as though a great exhale had passed through the shelves. I waited for something else to happen, a shadow to form, a book to speak, a hand to reach out from between the aisles. Nothing came. The amber lamps warmed again, their light returning softly, as if waking from a brief sleep. The pressure in the air loosened. The shelves eased back a fraction, relaxing their subtle inward lean. It was quiet, ordinary quiet, almost peaceful. I took a trembling step backward, then another. The open book on the floor lay still, motionless now, its page no longer shifting. The name my name remained, but the word missing below it had faded into something lighter, like ink smudged by time rather than intent. It barely looked legible anymore. For the first time since entering the corridor, I could breathe without feeling watched. I whispered, "It's over." The library didn't answer, but it didn't contradict me either. I backed away from the open book. The shelves didn't move this time. They stayed still, humbly silent, as though embarrassed by whatever frenzy had come over them. When I emerged from the narrow aisle into the wider central rotunda, the difference was immediate. The space felt open again. The lights glowed warm and familiar. The air held only the usual scent of old paper, gentle, dusty, reassuring, a quiet, normal library. I almost laughed from relief. I placed the green book gently on the reading table, as if setting down a piece of glass. Its cover no longer pulsed with warmth. Instead, it felt like any other old volume, a little worn, a touch dusty, slightly cool from the air. I dared to open it again. The page that had held the words, those accusatory sentences, was blank, clean, untouched. Every page before and after it was blank too, as though nothing had ever appeared there. My memory must have been playing tricks, or fear had filled the page with illusions. I exhaled slowly, letting my pulse settle. The lamps blinked softly, normal as ever. The shelves stood polite and unmoving. The sounds that had once seemed so deliberate were gone completely. Nothing followed me as I walked toward the main doors. No pages turned. No footsteps trailed behind. Even the entrance hall felt harmless. I reached for the glass doors, expecting them to resist, or for the lights to flicker ominously, but they didn't. The latch clicked open immediately, smooth and easy under my hand. Cool night air spilled across my face, a relief so deep it almost weakened my knees. I stepped outside, letting the door shut quietly behind me. The silence of the empty street washed over me, true silence. No page turning, no muffled footsteps, no shifting shelves. I tilted my head back, breathing in the crisp night, letting the tension slip from my shoulders. I whispered to myself, "It really is over." And then, something tapped lightly against the glass behind me. I froze. One soft tap, like a fingertip, or a page corner flicking against a window. I turned slowly. The library interior sat in perfect stillness. Lamps steady, shelves calm, the rotunda quiet. But the green book, the one I had left on the table, was no longer closed. It lay open, and though I couldn't see the page from outside, I saw one thing clearly. A single corner of the open page curled inward, like a hand had just turned it, and the page turned itself all the way over, with the slow, deliberate sound I had grown to dread. Flip. The page inside the library turned itself fully, completing the motion with a soft rustle that traveled through the door glass into the quiet street. The sound was gentle, almost tender, but there was something unmistakably intentional beneath it. Something that said, come back. A chill crawled up my spine. No, I whispered, stepping away from the door. No, I'm done. I'm leaving. But the library did not accept that. A second page turned, then a third. The sound deepened, paper brushing paper in a measured, rising rhythm, like a heartbeat made from ink and cellulose. I backed farther onto the pavement. The lights inside flickered, not erratically, not malfunctioning. In sequence, a slow ripple of illumination from the front desk to the central hall, to the rotunda, then down the very aisle I had just escaped, leading straight to the door. I turned to run, but the moment my foot hit the street, something shifted behind the glass. The door latch clicked. Once, twice, then slowly, the way a sigh might open a pair of old lungs. The door eased itself outward. A breath of warm library air escaped into the night. Not wind, not heat, something else. The scent of paper, old glue, ink long dried, and underneath it all, faint and unmistakable, my own handwriting. Stop, I whispered. Please, stop. The page turning paused, as if listening. For a moment, I hoped the library had relented. Then, a sound rose from deep inside. A low shuffle, like hundreds of books sliding forward half a centimeter at once. A repositioning, a recalibration, a collective inhale. Then, flip, 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 flip. Dozens of pages turning at once. Hundreds. An entire library reading, rewriting, awakening. The sound rolled toward the door like a tide. Panic surged. I ran down the street, heart hammering, lungs tight with cold air and fear. My footsteps echoed sharply in the empty town square. No one else was around. Every window dark, every shop shuttered. The world felt deserted, abandoned for reasons I could not name. Behind me, the library's lights brightened. Pages turned faster. A new sound threaded through them, whispering, not speech, not voices. The whisper of pens moving, scribbling, recording, tracking, as if the library were writing something down. And the subject was me. I sprinted harder. The sound didn't fade. It followed. The whispering grew clearer, sharpening into a susurration of strokes on paper continuous, looping, urgent. I turned a corner and pressed myself against a brick wall, gasping for breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. The writing stopped instantly. I held my breath. Silence consumed the street. Then, from the other side of the wall, inches behind my head, a soft tap, like the point of a pencil marking a page. I flinched away just as more taps followed, light and fast, like impatient fingers tapping a desk. Nope, not fingers, not impatient. A signal, a location marker, letting the library know exactly where I was. I stumbled backward into the road, nearly tripping over the curb. The tapping stopped. The night went still again. Then a page turned from somewhere I could not see. Closer this time. I forced myself to move. One step, then another. Every shadow looked wrong. Every window felt like an eye. My mind raced. Why me? Why my handwriting? Why a book that knew my memories better than I did? I needed answers, but the library was the last place I could return to for them. I headed toward the town's edge, where the road sloped into open fields. The moonlit grass swayed in a lazy breeze, normal, natural, comfortingly indifferent compared to the suffocating air inside the library. When I reached the wooden footbridge at the top of the hill, I stopped to catch my breath. Silence, a true silence. My muscles loosened, my pulse slowed. I let myself believe, for a fragile moment, that I had outrun the library. Then a book slid onto the footbridge beside my shoe. It landed with a soft thud, not thrown, not dropped, placed. I stared at it, too afraid to touch, but even more afraid to look away. It wasn't the green book. It was smaller, bound in cracked brown leather, with no title on the spine. The cover lay slightly open. No wind touched it. Yet the first page turned itself toward me, with an impossibly slow grace. Ink rose to the surface of the paper, appearing like breath on glass. You left a chapter unfinished. I staggered back. No, I'm not part of you. You're not part of me. I didn't write anything for you. The ink shimmered. More words surfaced. You did. You forgot. We kept the rest for you. Then the second page turned itself. This one bore a sketch. Not a scene. Not a diagram. A face. My face. But younger. And beneath it, written in the exact shape of my handwriting, return to complete revision. The bridge creaked beneath my feet as though something weightless had stepped onto it. I backed up slowly. No, please, I won't go back. The book replied by closing itself, gently, almost politely, and sliding a few inches toward me. An invitation, a command, a reminder. Then, from the darkness behind me, carried on a wind that had not existed seconds before, came the softest, most terrible sound of the night. A page turning inside the library, though the library was far away now, followed by a whisper. Come finish your story. The footbridge shuddered. My name began writing itself on the book's spine. I ran. I didn't look back, but the breeze behind me carried one last turning page. Slow, patient, inevitable. The library wasn't done, and it would keep writing until I returned. I didn't stop running until the lights of the town were nothing more than a thin smear behind me. The night air grew colder, sharpening the edges of my breath, but it felt cleaner than the thick, curated quiet of the library. Every step carried me farther from the shelves, farther from the pages that tried to remember me better than I remembered myself. Eventually, my legs buckled, and I collapsed against an old stone boundary wall marking the edge of a farm. The stones were rough against my palms, grounding me in a way nothing else had that night. I stayed there, breathing shakily, staring into the open darkness of the countryside. Nothing chased me. No pages turning, no soft tapping, no whisper of ink, just the wind, faint and indifferent. For a moment, I believed, truly believed, that the library had let me go. Then something brushed my ankle. I recoiled instantly, heart pounding. But when I looked down, there was nothing alive there. Only a sheet of paper, half buried in the grass, its edges fluttering lightly as though trying to catch my attention. No, I whispered, dread rising like cold water. I picked it up only because leaving it there felt more dangerous. It was a page torn from a book, thick, aged paper, ink faint but unmistakable. At the top was a line written in looping handwriting. Chapter, The Escape Attempt. My stomach tightened. Below that, more text jagged, uneven, as though written while the writer's hand trembled. The subject believes they have outrun the archive. Record ends when they cross the boundary wall. I stared at the last line. It didn't make sense. Not until I noticed the final phrase. Turn over. My hands shook violently as I flipped the page. On the back, a sketch. Not of a scene. Not of the library. Of me. Right now. Kneeling by the boundary wall. Holding this page. Precise. Correct. Impossible. Beneath the sketch, a single sentence curved like a smile. We know where the next chapter starts. A cold breath swept the grass. Behind me, somewhere in the dark, one page turned. Slow, deliberate, waiting. Story 5. The cave that echoed before I spoke. I reached the mouth of the cave just after dusk, guided only by a fading strip of light that clung stubbornly to the horizon. The cliffside here was quiet in a heavy, listening way. No insects, no wind, no shifting stones, as though the entire landscape were waiting for something to begin. My torchlight touched the cave walls, revealing damp limestone that glimmered like old bone. I took a breath, preparing myself to call out, just to test the acoustics. But before I could speak, a voice echoed back. My voice, soft, distant, perfectly shaped, perfectly toned, yet spoken 3 seconds before I opened my mouth. I froze, pulse hammering in my ears. I whispered, "Hello," but the echo answered first, slipping out of the darkness with a faint tremor. "Hello." Then my whisper followed, late, landing like an apology. The delay wasn't backward. It wasn't a repetition. It was the cave guessing, predicting, speaking for me, speaking before me. And as the last hints of daylight died behind me, the echo whispered again, this time a word I had not yet thought to say. Come. The word come drifted out of the darkness with a softness that unsettled me more than any shout could have. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even persuasive. It sounded more like a memory, something I had once said inside this cave, though I had never been here before. At least, I didn't think I had. I stepped 1 foot inside. The ground was damp, cold seeping through the sole of my boot. I opened my mouth to whisper something, anything, but the cave spoke first. Careful. The warning echoed gently along the stone walls. And then my own whisper followed. Unsteady. Careful. I stopped breathing. This wasn't an echo bouncing off the walls. It wasn't delayed sound. It wasn't physics. It was anticipation. The cave was guessing me. A faint drip of water broke the silence somewhere deeper inside, each drop echoing in perfect intervals. But the air carried something else too, a subtle vibration, like a voice too soft to hear, humming just beneath perception. The sound seemed to coil through the tunnels, brushing past my skin like a breeze without air. I swallowed. A small sound, barely a click. But the cave repeated it back to me 2 seconds before I swallowed. A soft, dry click in the darkness. Then my throat moved. I whispered, "Stop." The cave answered instantly, "Stop." And my own whisper came after, weak and shaking. My palms grew damp. I forced myself to turn, just to check that the entrance was still behind me. That escape was 1 step away if I needed it. The faint light from outside still cut a pale wedge across the stone floor. But when I turned forward again, the cave whispered something new. "Don't." My breath hitched in my lungs. This time, the echo didn't match anything in my head. I hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't formed a word. I had barely finished turning. Yet the cave anticipated something I didn't even know about myself. I stepped back toward the entrance, and the echo rolled ahead of me, its tone lower, almost thoughtful. Leaving. Then my boots scraped stone, the true sound, arriving late. Like an obedient follower, I whispered, "How do you—" But the cave murmured over me, "You ask?" I hadn't asked yet. My stomach tightened with a slow, creeping dread. Every sound I made was being gently overwritten, predicted, replaced by something that felt familiar. Too familiar. Like someone who knew the rhythm of my breath, the hesitation in my voice, the shape of my questions. Someone who knew me better than I did. A faint tremor traveled through the stone under my feet. Subtle, but unmistakable, as though the cave had shifted closer by an inch. The vibration rippled up my legs, threading into my bones. The echo whispered again, softer, intimate. "You remember?" I whispered back, terrified. Remember what? But the cave's answer arrived first. My answer, not my voice, but my tone. Me. The moment the cave answered me, something deep inside the stone seemed to settle, like it had finally said a word it had been waiting centuries to speak. The air in the tunnel thickened subtly, carrying a mineral scent that clung to the back of my throat. I tried to steady my breathing, but the cave knew even that intention. Before my chest could rise, the echo arrived, a soft inhalation that wasn't mine. "Hey." Then my own breath followed, late, shaky. I whispered, "Stop doing that." But the cave's voice overlapped instantly. "Stop doing that." And only after did my true whisper slip out, small and powerless. The cave wasn't repeating me. It was shadowing me, preceding me, learning me. A faint drip echoed deeper inside. Plink, plink, plink. Each droplet hitting stone in unnervingly perfect rhythm, as though marking time for a ritual I didn't understand. I stepped further into the tunnel, just 2 slow paces. My boots crushed grit on the floor, yet even that sound felt out of place. The cave made its version first, a soft crunch, arriving a heartbeat before I moved. Then my real footfall followed. I whispered, "Why?" And the cave replied before I could finish inhaling, "To hear you again." My breath caught. The cave's breath, or what passed for it, arrived first. The temperature dropped suddenly. A cold wind brushed my cheek, except no air actually moved. It was the sensation of a breeze without the breeze itself, like the memory of wind brushing past the skin. I turned to leave. The cave whispered, turning. Then I moved. I froze. I tried stepping backward. The cave said, "Back." Then my leg obeyed. My stomach twisted. It wasn't predicting me anymore. It was directing the sequence. My actions were becoming the echo. The cave's anticipations were the true sound. I felt as though the stone around me shifted, not visibly, not physically, but in presence. The darkness ahead pulsed once, faintly, like lungs expanding deep within the earth. A rumbling murmur rose through the walls, quiet but immense. Not words, not wind, something like a voice practicing speech from within miles of rock. trying to fit its sound to my shape. I whispered, "Don't come closer." But the cave spoke first. "You asked me to." I hadn't, but some part of me tensed, because it didn't sound like a lie. Another drip echoed. This time didn't sound like water. Plink. Closer. Plink. Right beside me. Plink. Behind me. I spun around, heart slamming painfully against my ribs. Nothing moved. The cave floor was smooth, dry, untouched. But then, the echo of my racing heartbeat rolled through the cavern before I felt the next beat inside my chest. Lub-dum, lub-dum, echo heart, then heart. I stumbled backward. The cave whispered, "Steady." Then my heel hit the ground, exactly in rhythm. I whispered, "You're inside my head." The cave murmured gently, correcting me. "Inside your memory." I shook. "I've never been here." A low, nearly sympathetic hum rolled through the stone. "You are small." My skin crawled. "No, I would remember." "You asked me," the cave whispered, soft as breath through cloth. "You wanted me to answer first." My legs weakened. I backed toward the entrance, or what I hoped was the entrance, but the darkness felt deeper now, as though the cave had pressed its walls slightly inward, bending the geometry of the tunnel without visibly moving it. Another echo arrived, a whisper of my footsteps, preceding mine down the corridor. Then another, but this one wasn't mine. Another set of footsteps, soft, bare, arriving just a fraction too early, like someone walking ahead of me in my own rhythm. I whispered, "Who's there?" The cave answered instantly, "Remember." And the bare footsteps continued. Left, right, left, in perfect synchrony with my fear. As the echo murmured my next breath before I could inhale, I realized something with a cold, sinking certainty. The cave didn't just know my voice, or my words, or my movements. It knew the version of me I had forgotten. The bare footsteps ahead of me moved with an eerie softness, as though the stone itself cushioned each contact. They weren't echoes of mine. They didn't match my pace anymore. They wandered, paused, shifted, almost as if whoever they belonged to was turning to look back at me. But there was no one in the tunnel. No warmth. No silhouette. No shift of air. Just the lingering presence of someone the cave remembered. Even if I didn't, I swallowed hard. The sound was small, but the cave produced its version first, a dry click echoing through the darkness. Then my own swallow followed. Late and weak, I whispered, "Show yourself." The cave whispered back, overlapping me. "You saw." My skin prickled. When? A pause. Pages of silence turning. Then, when you were little, those words weren't a prediction. They weren't an imitation. They were a statement. The air deepened around me, thick as cold breath. I pressed my palm against the cave wall. The stone felt damp, but beneath the moisture, it pulsed faintly. A slow, steady thrum, like a distant heartbeat muffled by ages of rock. I jerked my hand back. The cave murmured, "Don't be afraid of me." Then my own breath, trembling, came after every sound was drifting out of my control. The footsteps resumed, bare soles, tapping lightly on stone, moving deeper. The echo of those steps came first, Then a half-second later, the faint, real sound followed, as though someone near me walked. But not with me. I forced myself forward, driven by something between instinct and dread. The tunnel widened slightly, revealing a chamber shaped like a throat hollowed into the earth. My torchlight flickered across jagged formations, stalactites descending like stone teeth, stalagmites rising like roots of ancient trees. Then I saw it. A small alcove in the wall, barely waist-high, just deep enough for a child to crawl into. My stomach twisted fiercely. The moment my eyes locked onto it, the cave whispered, "You hid?" I stepped back immediately. No, I've never been here. The echo contradicted me without hesitation. "You cried here." My chest tightened as though the air itself had clenched around me. "I don't remember," I whispered through gritted teeth. "You asked me not to let you remember." That voice, not mocking, not cruel, just matter of fact, like stone stating the truth of gravity. My pulse quickened. The cave murmured ahead of time, following my heart's rhythm in perfect anticipation. Lubdum, lubdum. Then my heartbeat arrived. Late. The echo heart was the real one now. I raised my torch toward the alcove. Light spilled inside, revealing shallow carvings on the stone, small lines, scratched by something blunt or weak. Not patterns, not symbols, just marks. Chaotic, frantic, like a child clawing at stone. My chest constricted. I didn't know why, but the sight terrified me. Before I could speak, the cave spoke. "You called for me then." And then my real voice trembled out. Called for who, friends? Silence. Then, softly, like an apology carved into the air, for me, I stepped away from the alcove, torch shaking in my hand. The chamber suddenly felt narrower, as if the walls had shifted closer by a few inches. The stone pulsed again, closer this time, a tremor brushing my boots. I whispered, "What happened here?" The cave didn't echo that question. Not ahead, not after. Instead, it replied with a sentence that chilled me more than anything it had said so far. "You survived." My legs weakened. The floor seemed to tilt. I braced myself against the wall, but the stone felt alive, like muscle tightening slowly beneath skin. "I need to leave." I breathed. "Leaving?" The cave whispered, before I even moved. Then my foot took a step. The chamber's entrance narrowed subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that I felt the space shrink. I pushed forward anyway, but the stone vibrated in a low, warning hum. The cave murmured, "Not yet." My breath faltered. "Why not?" The echo answered gently, almost sorrowfully. "You haven't looked." Before I could ask what it meant, a faint sound rose from the alcove. Not dripping, not shifting rock. Something quieter. A small, soft exhale. The kind a child makes while sleeping, or crying very quietly. I froze. The echo whispered behind me, close enough to brush my ear. "You left someone behind." The chamber darkened for a moment, as if the cave held its breath, as if waiting. My heartbeat stuttered. I turned slowly toward the alcove. The marks in the stone seemed deeper now, fresh, as though small fingers had scraped them recently. I whispered, "Who?" The cave answered before I inhaled, "You." And my own voice never came. because my throat had closed. The cave continued, soft as a lullaby. Come see what you forgot. The words, "Come see what you forgot," clung to the damp air long after the echo faded. My torchlight trembled across the chamber, catching the alcove at odd angles. The carvings inside it seemed to shift slightly in the flicker, as though correcting themselves when I blinked. I stepped back, then another step. My lungs fought for steady breath. The cave didn't follow this time. There was no anticipatory whisper, no echo rushing ahead of my thoughts. Only the faint drip of distant water and a quiet that felt strangely hollow, as if the cave had turned its face away. "I'm leaving," I whispered. No answer came first. My voice reached the walls cleanly, without interruption. That alone made my skin crawl. I turned away from the alcove, forcing my legs to move. The passage leading toward the entrance stretched outward like a dark throat, but the air here felt thinner, freer, as though the cave were releasing its grip. My footsteps sounded normal again. My breath was mine. No pre-echo, no predictions. The absence of that unnatural anticipation was almost comforting. Almost. I walked faster, torchlight slicing the tunnel ahead. The stone under my boots no longer pulsed. The walls no longer hummed. The strange, mirrored rhythm of echo heart before heart had faded, replaced by the ordinary throb of blood pounding behind my ribs. Every meter I put between myself and the alcove felt like reclaiming something the cave had borrowed. My voice, my steps, my thoughts, all sliding back into alignment. By the time I glimpsed the faint glow of the cave mouth ahead, I felt something close to relief. The entrance was still open, still waiting, still real. A thin strip of moonlight painted the ground outside, cool and silver. I stepped toward it, almost running now, hungry for the cold night air. When I stepped out of the cave, the breeze brushed my face, genuine and gentle. The sky stretched wide above me. Crickets hummed in the tall grass. The world felt vast and simple again, a startling contrast to the suffocating interior behind me. I leaned my hand on a boulder just outside the entrance, breathing hard. For a moment, nothing happened. No echo overtook my breath. No whispered reply preceded my thoughts. Only silence. Relief loosened something tight inside my chest. A small laugh escaped me, thin, exhausted, but real. "I'm out," I murmured, and the breeze answered only with its own rustle. I moved farther from the cave, step by step. Each one felt steadier, like sinking back into my own rhythm after stumbling in someone else's. The earth beneath my feet no longer whispered beneath the surface. The shadows no longer curled inwards. I felt safe. By the time I reached the small footpath that wound down the hillside, I dared to look back. The cave sat still and silent. Its entrance, nothing more than a black mouth set into the rock. No movement, no sound, no intelligence waiting behind it. Just a hole in the stone, like any other. I whispered, almost to reassure myself. "You can't reach me out here." This time, nothing spoke ahead of me. No pre-echo. The world was mine again. I exhaled, closing my eyes for a moment. That was when something brushed my palm. I flinched, looking down. A small pebble rested in my hand. I hadn't picked it up. I hadn't touched the ground. My hand had been empty a second ago. The pebble was warm, freshly held. By someone, I dropped it instinctively, heart leaping into my throat. My breath came out in short bursts. I backed away from the spot, refusing to turn toward the cave, knowing, somehow, that looking directly would be worse. But something else caught my eye. On the ground, half hidden in moonlit dust, lay a faint imprint, small, barefoot, exactly the size of the child the cave claimed I once was. Inside the footprint, the dust trembled, as if something had just stepped there. Then the air around me shifted. A soft whisper curled past my ear. Not ahead of me, not after, perfectly in sync, as though the cave had followed me outside, and in a voice barely more than breath, it murmured, "You never left me." The whisper, "You never left me," dissolved into the night air like breath on cold glass. I stood completely still, afraid that if I inhaled too sharply, the echo would inhale first. But it didn't. The silence that followed wasn't freedom. It was anticipation. The pebble I dropped rolled once across the dirt, not downhill, toward me. I stepped back, and the cave, though far behind me now, exhaled. A deep, resonant breath that traveled through the ground rather than air, trembling up my legs and settling heavy in my chest. A pressure, a remembering. I whispered, "Stay away." But the world remained silent. Then, just before my next breath entered my lungs, the cave answered in a soft, pained echo. "Stay." And my breath followed after. Trembling, I froze. It had spoken in harmony with me. Not ahead, not after, with, as if it had stepped out of the stone and into the open night. I forced myself to turn toward the path leading downhill. The moonlit grass rustled faintly as I stepped into it, each blade brushing my boots with a dry whisper. But a split second before my foot touched the ground, I heard it, the predicted step. My step, but not mine. A bare footfall, small, light, landing just before me. I whipped around, but nothing was there. Only the cave mouth behind me, dark and still. Yet something had followed. I felt it before I heard it. A warmth behind my right shoulder, like someone leaning close. A presence with no weight but undeniable proximity. And then came the whisper, perfectly timed with the beating of my heart. "Don't leave me alone again." My chest clenched. Terror. Yes, but beneath the terror, something else. A ripple of grief, sharp and impossible, as if the words stirred a memory buried behind bone and scar tissue. "I don't know you," I insisted. Then, before my pulse could even quicken, the echo replied with crushing certainty, "You begged me not to let you forget." My breath collapsed. I staggered away, stumbling over the uneven ground. The hillside blurred around me as adrenaline surged through my veins. Every rustle of grass sounded like someone matching my pace. One breath behind or ahead, I couldn't tell. I broke into a run. The first real echo arrived ahead of me, my footsteps amplified by the landscape, bouncing off distant rocks. But the cave's echo followed, faster, closer, a child's run, light, frantic, keeping up with me effortlessly. I gasped, and a soft gasp answered one beat ahead. The world narrowed to nothing but my pulse and the sound of two versions of myself, one present, one past, racing downhill through moonlit terrain. I reached the old wooden fence marking the property boundary and vaulted over it. My palms hit rough wood, splinters slicing skin, but I didn't stop. Pain meant reality, and I needed reality desperately. The ground flattened into a dirt road. At the far end, barely visible, stood a small shepherd's hut, dark, abandoned, but human, architectural, safe, at least safer than the cave. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning. The echo sprinted first. Its footfalls painted the air before mine landed. Its breath arrived before mine. Its soft, steady weeping threaded the night like a second, impossible soundtrack. I reached the hut door and slammed my shoulder into it. The hinges groaned but held. I shoved again, harder, until the rusted latch gave way and the door crashed inward. I stumbled inside and spun to shut it, but stopped cold, because the echo, the version that always came before me, had already slammed the door 3 seconds ago. The sound hit me as memory and present at once. I shut it anyway, sealing myself inside a cramped room filled with old tools and dust-matted curtains. My torch flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the hut. For a moment, everything went still, too still. My breathing slowed, my heartbeat steadied. The echo didn't come. I whispered, "You can't reach me here." Silence. Then, a tiny, trembling breath behind me. Not predicted, not repeated, simultaneous. I turned. In the far corner stood a small outline, barely the shape of a person, barely more than shadow. Knees drawn to chest, face buried in arms. A child. The child's shoulders shook with quiet sobs I didn't yet hear, until half a second later, the sound finally reached me. My own voice, my own sobs, a sound I hadn't made in years. The child lifted its head. Its face was smudged with dirt and tears, but its features were unmistakably familiar. My features, younger by decades, eyes red, lips trembling. It whispered, and this time, the echo matched perfectly. "You said you'd come back." I shook my head violently. No, you're not real. You're something the cave made." The child echoed first, to remember. Then my real voice followed, weaker, crumbling. "Remember what?" The child stepped closer, feet bare, leaving no prints, except the prints formed after each step, delayed, my size, my age, as if I were following myself from the past. The child pressed a small, cold hand against my wrist and whispered, "You left me in the dark." My knees buckled. Images flickered, not memories, but sensations. Cold stone against my cheek, damp air, panic tightening my chest, tiny fingernails scraping at limestone. The child's voice trembled. "You promised the cave you'd stay if it helped you forget." My blood froze. Then the echo, the real echo, murmured the same words behind me. I turned. The hut door was gone. The window was gone. The walls had softened into rippling stone, and the darkness pressed inward, whispering ahead of my breath. "You came back." The cave had not followed me. I had never left. The stone walls closed in with a slow, inevitable certainty, as though the hut had merely peeled away to reveal the truth beneath it, the same truth I had tried to escape, the same truth I had apparently begged to forget. The child version of me still held my wrist, but its fingers felt colder now, almost weightless, like memory clinging, not flesh. Its eyes shimmered with that impossible mixture of fear and recognition I couldn't bear to meet. "I didn't leave you," I whispered. "I didn't know." But the echo answered before the words left my throat. "You did." The child stepped closer. Our shadows merged on the uneven stone floor, mine long and trembling, theirs small and steady, as though rooted to something deeper. "You left me in the dark," the child repeated, but the tone had changed. Less accusation, more resignation, almost relief. My voice trembled. "What do you want from me?" The echo spoke first, to finish. Then my words followed, helplessly. A sound rose from deep in the cavern, a soft, rolling resonance, like lungs filling slowly after years of stillness. The stone floor vibrated beneath my feet. The walls quivered with a quiet hunger. The child released my wrist. It took a step backward toward the deeper tunnel, a tunnel I didn't see before. A narrow passage carved with scratches like those in the alcove. Its silhouette thinned into the glow of my torch, becoming more shadow than body. "Come with me," it whispered. And this time, both voices, mine and the echo, arrived in perfect, horrifying unison. "Come." My breath caught. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to consider. The cave had never been predicting me. It had been remembering me, guiding me back along the path I had walked once before, as a frightened child trying to bargain with the dark. And the child, the shadow, the echo that wore my old face, it wasn't luring me. It was returning to where I left it. I stepped back, shaking, refusing, choking on fear. But the tunnel behind the child glowed faintly, with a pale, pulsing light I couldn't trace to any source. A heartbeat, my heartbeat, coming from deeper in the rock. The child tilted its head. Its voice softened to a hush. "You can't leave half of yourself underground." Then it stepped into the glowing tunnel, and something deep inside the cave whispered my name. Not ahead, not after, from right beside me, waiting. And now, listener, you've reached the end of tonight's wanderings. The echoes have quieted. The pages have settled. The footsteps in the dark have paused, only for a moment. If your breath has slowed, if your thoughts have softened, if the shadows around your room feel just a little nearer than before, that's all right. Some stories are meant to follow you gently, resting just behind your shoulder, like a memory you haven't fully turned to face. But for now, let the night wrap around you. Let your heartbeat fall into its familiar, sleepy rhythm. You are safe where you are, even if something in these stories is still listening. And when the next night comes, and your room grows quiet, and that quiet grows just a little too deep, I'll be here again, waiting to guide you back into the dark. Sleep well, listener, and remember, not everything that follows you into your dreams wants to wake you up. Good night.